The Kipling Road. Remember the old road, the steep stony path that took us up from Rajpur, toiling and sweating, and grumbling at the climb, but enjoying it all the same. At first, the hills were hot and bare, but then there were trees near Jharipani, and we stopped at the halfway house and swallowed lungful of diamond cut air. Then onwards, upwards to the town, our appetites to repair. Well, no one uses the old road anymore. Walking is out of fashion now. And if you have a car to take you swiftly up the motor road, why bother to toil up a disused path? You'd have to be an old romantic like me to want to take that route again. But I did it last year, pausing and plodding and gasping for air. Both road and I being a little worse for wear, but I made it to the top and stopped to rest and looked down to the valley and the silver stream, winding its way towards the plains. And the land stretched out before me, and the years fell away. And I was a boy again, and the friends of my youth were there beside me, and nothing had changed. Remember the old road. As boys, we would often trudge up from Rajpur to Mussoorie by the old bridle path, the road that used to serve the hill station in the days before the motor road was built. Before 1900, the traveller to Mussoorie took a tonga from Saharanpur to Dehradun, spent the night at a Rajpur hotel, and the following day came up the steep 7-mile path on horseback or on foot or in a dandy, means a crude palanquin held aloft by two, sometimes four, sweating coolies. The railway came to Dehradun in 1904, and a few years later the first motor car made it to Mussoorie, the motor road following the winding contours and hairpin bends of the old bullock cart road. Rajpur went out of business. No one stopped there anymore. The hotels became redundant, and the bridle path was seldom used except by those of us who thought it would be fun to come up on foot. For the first 2 or 3 miles, you walked in the hot sun along a treeless path. It was only at Jharipani, at approximately 4,000 feet, that the oak forests began, providing shade and shelter. Situated on a spur of its own was the railway school, Oak Grove, still there today, providing a boarding school education to the children of railway personnel. My mother and her sisters came from a railway family, and all of them studied at Oak Grove in the 1920s. So did a male cousin who succumbed to cerebral malaria during the school term. In spite of the salubrious climate, mortality was high among school children. There were no cures then for typhoid, cholera, malaria, dysentery, and other infectious diseases. Above Oak Grove was Fair Lawn, the palace of the Nepali royal family. There was a sentry box outside the main gate, but there was never any sentry in it, and on more than one occasion I took shelter there from the rain. Today, it is a series of cottages, one of which belongs to Outlook's editor Vinod Mehta, who seeks shelter there from the heat and dust of Delhi. From Jarapani, we climbed to Barlowganj, where another venerable institution, St. George's College, crowns the hilltop. Then on to Bala Hisar, once the home in exile of an Afghan king, and now the grounds of Winberg Ellen, another school. In later years, I was to live near this school, and it was its then principal, Reverend W. Biggs, who told me that the bridle path was once known as the Kipling Road. Why was that? I asked. Had Kipling ever come up that way? Reverend Biggs was not sure, but he referred me to Kim and the chapter in which Kim and the Lama leave the plains for the hills. It begins thus: they had crossed the Sivaliks and the half tropical dune, left Mussoorie behind them, and headed north along the narrow hill roads. Day after day, they struck deeper into the huddled mountains, and day after day, Kim watched the Lama return to a man's strength. Among the terraces of the dune, he had leaned on the boy's shoulder, ready to profit by wayside halts. Under the great ramp of Mussoorie, he drew himself together as an old hunter faces a well remembered bank, and where he should have sunk exhausted, swung his long rapiers about him, drew a deep double lungful of the diamond air, and walked as only a hillman can. This description is accurate enough, but it is not evidence that Kipling actually came this way, and his geography becomes quite confusing in the subsequent pages, as Peter Hopkins discovered when he visited Mussoorie a few years ago, retracing Kim's journeys for his book Quest for Kim. Hopkirk spent some time with me in this little room where I am now writing, but we were unable to establish the exact route that Kim and the Lama took after traversing Mussoorie. Presumably, they had come up the bridle path, but then after that, Kipling becomes rather vague. Mussoorie does not really figure in Rudyard Kipling's prose or poetry. The Simla Hills were his beat. As a journalist, he was a regular visitor to Simla, then the summer seat of the British Raj. But last year, my Swiss friend brought me proof that Kipling had indeed visited Mussoorie. Among his unpublished papers and other effects in the Library of Congress, there exists an album of photographs which includes two of the Charleville Hotel, Mussoorie, where he had spent the summer of 1888. Now we know that he came to Mussoorie and spent some time there, and that he would have come up by the old bridle path. There was no other way except by bullock cart on the long and tortuous cast road, and Reverend Biggs and others were right in calling it the Kipling Road, although officially that was never its name. As you climb up from Barlowganj, you pass a number of pretty cottages: May Cottage, Wakefield Cottage, Ralston Manor, Wayside Hall, and these old houses all have stories to tell, for they have stood mute witnesses to the comings and goings of all manner of people. The Ralston Manor. It was witness to an impromptu ceremony, probably Mussourie's first European cremation in the late 1890s. There is a small chapel in the grounds of Ralston, and the story goes that a Mr. and Mrs. Smallman had been living in the house, and Mr. Salman had expressed a wish to be cremated at his death. When he died, his widow decided to observe his wishes and had her servants build a funeral pyre in the garden. The cremation was well underway when someone rode by and looked in to see what was happening. The unauthorized cremation was reported to the authorities, and Mrs. Smallman had to answer some awkward questions. However, she was let off with a warning not to cremate any future husbands, and later she built the little chapel on the site of the funeral pyre in gratitude, or as penance, or as a memorial, we are not told. But the chapel is still there, and this little tale is recorded in Chowkidar, Autumn 1995, the Journal of the British Association for Cemeteries in South Asia. As we move further up the road, keeping to the right, we come to Wayside Hall and Wayside Cottage, which have the advantage of an open, sunny hillside and views to the north and east. I lived in the cottage for a couple of years back in 1966 and 67 as a tenant of the Powell sisters who lived in the hall. There were three sisters, all in their 70s. They had survived their husbands: Annie, the eldest, Martha, the second, and Dr. Simmons, the third. They were God fearing religious folk, but not bigots. Never chided me for not going to church. Annie's tea, marvelous. Snacks and savories in abundance. They kept a beautiful garden. Why go to church? I said. Your garden is a church. In spring and summer, it was awash with poppies, petunia, phlox, larkspur, calendula, snapdragons, and other English flowers. During the monsoon, the gladioli took over, while magnificent dahlias reared up from the rich foliage. During the autumn came zinnias and marigold and cosmos. And even during the winter months, there would be geraniums and primulae blooming in the verandas. Honeysuckle climbed the wall outside my window, filling my bedroom with its heady scent. And wisteria grew over the main gate. There was perfume in the air. Annie herself smelled of freshly baked bread. Dr. Simons smelt of Pierre's baby soap. Martha smelt of apples. All good smells emanating from good people. Although they lived on their own without any men on the premises, they never felt threatened or insecure. Mussoorie was a safe place to live in then and still is to a great extent, much safer than towns in the plains where the crime rate keeps pace with the population growth. Annie's son, Gerald, then in his 60s, did come out to see them occasionally. He had been something of a shikari in his youth, or so he claimed, and told me he could call up a panther from the valley without any difficulty. To do this, he made a contraption out of an old packing case with a hole bored in the middle. Then he passed a length of thick wire through the hole and by moving the wire backwards and forwards produced a sound not dissimilar to the sighing, coughing sound made by a panther. Jerry invited me to join him on a steep promontory overlooking a little stream. I did so with some trepidation. Hunting had never been my forte, and normally I preferred to go along with Ogden Nash's dictum, if you meet a panther, don't enter. However, Jerry's gun looked powerful enough, and I believed him when he told me he was a crack shot. I have always taken people at their word. One of my failings, I suppose. Anyway, we positioned ourselves on this ledge and Jerry started producing panther noises with his box. His master's voice would have been proud of it. Nothing happened for about 20 minutes and I was beginning to lose patience when we were answered by the cough and grunt of what could only have been a panther. But we could not see it. Jerry produced a pair of binoculars and trained them on some distant object below, which turned out to be a goat. The growling continued, and then it was just above us. The panther had made a detour and was now standing on a rock and staring down, no doubt wondering which of us was making such attractive squalls. Jerry swung round, raised his gun and fired. He missed by a couple of feet and the panther bounded away, no doubt disgusted with the proceedings. We returned to Wayside Hall and revived ourselves with soda. We will get it next time, old chap, said Jerry. But although we tried, the panther did not put in another appearance. Thank you very much.